Okay, I think we can start the second meeting in the principles of programming graphical user interfaces. And as I described in the first meeting and hopefully have documented into the Moodle, it will be about developing graphical user interfaces using React for the web platform. So if we start by, well, just a quick reminder, so you can go through this React tract or the Java tract, or you can mix, but I assume most of you will be doing either or choice between these two. Basically, the same exercises will be done for both, and also this lecture will basically duplicate of the lecture yesterday, except now it will be a different tool to write basically the same program. So the tool we are using for the web development is React. So we are not doing plain JavaScript and HTML development. React is something quite different. So I assume you know the basics of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. For example, you have taken the course Johdatus www-tekniikoihin, the introduction to World Wide Web technologies, where you can learn about this basic stuff. And we will be focusing on React, which provides us one model to create graphical user interfaces, and therefore hopefully provides some understanding on theoretical level how you can possibly develop graphical user interfaces. This is actually quite different approach from what, for example, Swing gives you. So if you follow both tracks, you can also get some nice contrasting approaches into graphical user interface development. Of course, there are lots of shared issues as well. Yeah, so there is also a specific set of tools and libraries we will be using, so you can do React development in many different ways. What we will be using is a system called Create React App, and it provides in one easy-to-use package everything you need to do React development, and it's installed using Node Package Manager. It's based on this Node.js framework to do all the building and so on. The final application is not dependent on Node. You can get the final application out of the system and just put it on any web server. It's just then HTML and JavaScript. But while in development time, you need this whole Node and Node Package Manager based setup. So if you haven't done so yet, you need to install into your computer Node.js and Node Package Manager. I won't teach you how to do those. I assume you can follow instructions online, very commonly used tools, lots of documentation, and good standard default documentation. So if we start from the point of view that we have a Node Package Manager installed and Create React App installed on that, there are brief instructions also in the Moodle. Then we can actually start the development, and we start that by giving this command. I think I can from here. Let's just call it first example. So you go do this command line. You give this create React app command, and then you give name of the application you want to create. Then a lot of things happens. The create React app now goes to the internet, retrieves all the relevant libraries that are related to this. Will be part of this application and in the background, and this will take a while, and it's installing something like over 100 megabytes of stuff into your computer and into this particular folder where you run this command. So don't just run it anywhere, run it where you want your application to be created into. While it's doing that, I can tell a few words about what is the React. So first of all, it's a framework to build applications for web applications that run in a browser, mostly so-called single-page applications. So everything is packaged into the basically one HTML page, and all the logic and everything runs in the web browser. So there is necessarily not any need for the communication to the server. You just need the regular HTTP server, which serves the files we built with this tool. The React provides basic software architecture and philosophy. It also creates some provides some libraries to do the development, and then you can use it to build your own components, basically user interface components. So using the React, you can build your own set of components and then build application out of those components. And this can be hierarchical, so that you can build lower level components, basic labels and buttons and so on, and then build more complex components out of those. So now the npm, the create React app, has done all it wants to do to get everything started. You can see there are some instructions there, like npm start, so start the development server, npm run build, bundles the app into static files for production. So this is the command you do when your application is ready for going live. You get the compact package which you can then put into a web server and then let people use it. And there is also some testing possibilities, and then there is this eject command, which we will not look into. But basically, if you want to do first part of the development with React and then continue with the developing the end result with other tools, then you can eject the project out. So what it tells you first to do is to go to the folder it created, which matches the name I gave to it, and then give it command npm start. So npm is the node package manager, and give it command start. What this does is now it starts the development server. So this is a web server with lots of things happening in the background. And okay, I have something already about 3000. And then it will start the web browser. And there I will see a template application it created. It will take a couple of seconds because the development server is still starting, and now everything is running. Welcome to React. And then it also gives a hint where to go to get started, edit the source, app.js, and save the reload. So if we go into the folder, this is the folder where I ran the create React app. So it created me a folder, and here we have a couple of different files and folders. There is this node modules, and this is the large folder, 118 megabytes of data in there. This folder you don't need to include, for example, when you are submitting your solutions to the Moodle don't include the node modules folder. What we are interested in is mostly the source folder and potentially the public folder. We will look into this. So it told me to go into this folder, source folder, and then app.js is what you start looking at. So if you open that in the text editor, this is what we see. We have some import statements here. First, React and component from React, logo from this SVG file, and also one CSS file is imported here with these import commands. And then we have class app, which extends component, and it has one function called render, which returns div header, image header, paragraph, div. So this piece of HTML is basically returned from here, and then it exports default app. Now, if you look at this, it's not pure JavaScript, obviously, but it reminds you of JavaScript to some extent. And basically what this is type of JavaScript which supports what is called JSX. So that basically means that you can just write this kind of HTML code inside your JavaScript code. For example, return this piece of web page from your render method. And you can also store these bits into variables and so on, as we will see in the future. So Create React app and React in general provides you this sort of a new language or mix of languages, and it's compiling that on the background all the time. So I can just edit this and write here hello and save, and the word hello appears here. So the development server in the background is all the time monitoring the files, and whenever you edit them and save them, it tries to compile it and then shows you the latest output. Now, if I add here something, it shouldn't compile. Yeah. Actually tells me in the web page failed to compile, and also if I also open the console where I run the npm start command, you can see the same error here. So this part should be something that can be compiled as JavaScript or understood as JavaScript. So it's quite easy now to get started. But as said, React provides you this basic framework which makes it possible to create these components and then build the application based on those components. We don't want to do all that much actual creating the components during this course. So I've decided that we want to actually use an existing component library. So obviously there are lots of existing tools for React, and what we will use is material UI. So I'm writing here inside the folder that was created when I gave the command create React app. Inside that folder, I'm giving command npm install material UI. So now it will install this material UI library into that node modules folder, so I will be able to use it in my applications now. Material UI is a user interface library, as mentioned. You can find the documentation from materialui.com, materialui-.com, and basically what material is Google's user interface look and feel, what you can find in standard Android, for example. So Material UI is the implementation of that to React. So by installing that, we can start using these components in our own applications without need to define our own button every time and so on. Yeah, so I gave that command npm install material-ui, and then, well, again, something's happened, added 10 packages. And now I can keep the command npm start again. And yeah, then it starts the application. Of course, nothing has changed at this point because I hadn't started using those components yet. Yeah, so to start using this library, I need to import it. And first I will import MUI theme provider. From material UI styles / MUI theme provider. This is the basic well, overall container which you must include. So all the material UI component must be inside this MUI theme provider. So I can now include this MUI theme provider tag here, and yeah, I will just leave this for a couple of minutes here, but soon I will remove those when we start getting our own components. Let's see if it still compiles. Yeah, and obviously still no changes. Then I can import my first component from the material UI. I will include this component called paper, which is container where I can put other components into. From this same material UI package, and it's basically just the name of the component. And then I can add it here. Just add this paper, and I will explain this in a couple of seconds. And give it a style definition. And let's just get rid of all the other stuff right now, which it was in the template. Let's see what happens. Right now, we cannot really see much. I will add something inside the paper. So you can vaguely see that there is kind of a border here. So this is now the paper, the containing component, and this is what I put inside the paper. So now I can start just adding these new components in here. And yeah, maybe at this point, few words about the style definition here. So basically, this is just a style like you have in any HTML. You can give any tag the style definition, but the format looks a little bit funny, maybe. So you have these curly brackets outside here, and then another pair of curly brackets. So what is this? Inside here is just a JavaScript. So this is basically a JavaScript object. Like you can define the JSON objects in JavaScript. And the outer curly brackets here tell that, okay, inside these curly brackets, there is JavaScript. So how the React work is that whenever in your code it notices the tag, so basically this smaller than sign and then tag name, and then there should be a closing tag and so on. At that point, the React parser interprets the situation so that, okay, now there will be these tags that I will now consider this as basically the HTML content, the structural tags. And then if inside these tags you want to then again add JavaScript content, use variables or whatever, then you use the curly brackets, and whatever is in the curly brackets inside the tags, then again you can put those variables in there or their values, or do some calculation, do ifs and so on. So you can write JavaScript code where you put the tags, where you put the JavaScript, and so on. Also, it can be at times maybe a little bit confusing, but when you get the kind of the basics, understand the basics, it starts getting simple. And the style here, you must not give the HTML style type style thing, the style string, like you have in plain HTML. It must be a JavaScript object where you have these names and values. But yeah, there will be plenty of those examples. So, and it will, I think it's in practice easy. You will catch that even if it's not all clear right now. Yeah, so let's import few more components and get a small functional application. The layout will be quite ugly, and we won't talk about that much this time. You can use the basic HTML styles and so on, and as you can see, it's importing the CSS, so you can use those things and so on to do the layout, and maybe we have a little bit more look at some point, but for now let's just focus on the functionality and the components. So I will import a few more components like TextField from material UI, and then I will import checkbox, material UI, and it's actually without capitalization here, and one more button. There are a couple of different kinds of buttons. We'll use this raised button, and with these we should be able to build a simple currency converter similar to what I built yesterday with NetBeans. If I first now start just adding these into my user interface. So you can use basic HTML tags here like you saw in the template code, and just write strings in there, and then you can add these tags. So all the components basically are just then tags of their own, and when you define your own components, you will also then be able to just put tag names of your whatever components you define. We will look into that later. So we give this text field here. It's not necessarily give it an ID, but you will see some warnings in the outputs that, okay, there is no ID for this component. So just to follow the good practices, I will add the ID here, and then I will give a default value to this, again, curly brackets. So what follows now is JavaScript. I just give single value here in this case, default value, and then just closing tag, or well, not closing tag, but nothing goes inside the text field. You give the value with this default value parameter, and then writing a simple currency converter. So add another one for dollars. And let's see at this point what our program looks like. So now we have two text fields. And as you can see, they are functional text fields in the sense that you can type in text into these fields. And the labels are just the plain text I added in here inside the divs. And the divs take care that they stay in the same line. But as you saw, there is the layout is just what happens to be. They all just go into like centered.
Can you magnify it?
Yeah, is it more important to show this bigger or the code?
The code.
Yeah, maybe I can also something like this, but let's see, actually, maybe if I zoom here, so one more step, maybe we have room for one more. Okay, and yeah, let me just add a few more of those components. So inside yet another div, so we get yet another line. I want to add that checkbox, give it a label. This is for rounding. And then finally the button, raised button, and yeah, it is the ID, and then you give the button a label. And we should have working. If I remove that type, we also get the label for the checkbox, so you can see the layout is not quite what you want from your application. Everything spreads out to the centers, and then the checkbox spreads out to fill the area, so that's not really nice. And then we have this button, which has a little bit of animation. So that's it basically on how you specify how your interface look like. So in the render method, you return whatever tags you want there to be rendered for that particular, well, in this case, application. But then also it's the same principle if you define your own component and you just return the HTML, which is part of that component, and then the React builds the whole HTML based on that. If we open the developer tools, which if you are not familiar yet, I guess you will be in your favorite browser, you know that there is this console where you can see some of the output, so you can write stuff in there yourself with console.log and console error and console warning and so on. So it helps debugging. We can see that there is one message here. Logo is defined but never used, and this is indeed true. This logo is imported here, but it's never used in the application. That came from the template, so I can actually just remove this one. So you get a little bit more information here on the console than you would get if it compiles. Here you see only the actual application, and as said, you can get some information here, but the developer console, tools console, is where you can see most information. Then course, it's possible to browse the actual HTML, the DOM, the document object model. So just to summarize, DOM is basically the tree structure of the whole HTML base page. So we have we have the head and the body. Here you can then also when we have the root div, and there we have a app div. Okay, this matches quite nicely. We created this app. We were editing the app.js. This is what we were defining. And then when we look at this one, we get quite a mess of stuff in here. And yeah, it's not the best example, but it already illustrates that the default developer tools browser console is not very well working when you are creating React apps, because behind the scenes, the React takes all those component definitions and so on, and then constructs it into some sort of HTML by the code, which may be very messy or very complicated, so it's never meant to be manually edited. It's recommended that you install React developer tools for your browser. So I have installed the developer tools in the Chrome here. So I have now this new tab in the developer tools where I can go. And here I actually see very much what I have written into my source code. So here you can actually see it on the logical level that you work mostly. And this is what you usually want to do. So it works pretty much the same as the elements tab here, but it works on the logical level of the React. So we can see that, okay, here's the text field. And then only after that, when we go inside the text field, we can start seeing the actual HTML that was generated, which can be more or less complex, but on this level, we actually see the components we created. And it's very close to the code that we wrote. So definitely recommend you to install also the developer tools into your browser. Yeah. So next, we obviously want to make the application actually functional. And this is also where we start to get into the, well, it links very well to how you define the user interface. So I just start writing some code related to that. First, what I will do is write a constructor. So constructor to this component, this method is called when this component, in this case, the whole application is created. And what I will do here, well, you should always remember to call super if you overwrite the constructor. Things break if you don't call the super as the first thing. But what I want to do is define variable called state into this object. And state is the heart of these React applications and React components. This is where all the information is stored. What I want to store here is the euros value. That can be value 0. Dollars can be 0. So this is a JavaScript object. And then I want the Boolean value for the whether we do the rounding or not. So I just define the state to be a JavaScript object. And now when I specify how the user interface should look like, now instead of the default value, I specify the value, and the value will be this state euros for the euros, and value will be is state dollars. Dollars, so that I guess is quite logical. And now, obviously, I want the state to change whenever the value changes or something is done. And for this, we will use handlers. So just like in, well, basically every graphical user interface, you are reacting to events and user clicking buttons and so on. Those are the events. But yeah, let's see. What I want to do is update the values of the state whenever something significant changes. And how the React works is that it updates, basically runs this render command whenever the state changes. So you are not yourself calling this render, and you are not yourself actually modifying the user interface. So if you followed the lecture yesterday in Swing development, for example, you can directly call method like setText on a text field or label. In React, you never do that. You just specify what the application is like, and you can use this state here inside that definition. And then whenever the state changes, then the actual resulting HTML is updated for you. This is called declarative approach into the user interface development. So you declare how the user interface looks like. You not manipulate it directly, you just declare it. And there is a reason for why this is favored in some systems. It's because it basically takes away lots of possibilities how you can mess things up. When you just declare that, okay, this is how my interface looks like, depending on whatever the state of the application is, then you cannot kind of from different points adjust the value of the application or change something and then make some assumptions that, okay, this text field will always be visible, or this text field will never have a value longer than this or something. And then from when you actually modify it from some other place, then you may end up with some nasty bugs that takes long time to realize. So with declarative approach, it's much harder to make that sort of mistakes. But the declarative approach also means that actually when, for example, the user is typing in text to the text fields, we must update the state after every change of the value. Yeah, let me see. It should be okay. Here, and what I want to do is now first define a handler which handles the situation when the value of the euros changes. So when the value of the euros text field changes, and it will get as a parameter the new value, and then I will explain the arrow notation in a second. So what we will do is we pass the new value. Obviously, I need to put that in the variable. So I will pass whatever the new value is and calculate the dollars value. And let's just directly check that if this state do round. So if we do rounding, it will be math round the euros times rate. Otherwise, it will be euros times rate. So now I have calculated the new values for the euros and the dollars. And then what I need to do is call this set state. So now I will tell React that, okay, the state will change. And this is what triggers the actual user interface to update. So I just give the new values here. So the euros will be, I want this to be strings at this point, and dollars is plus. Dollars, and this should update the state, and this should cause render to be called again, and then it will use the updated states as specified here. And euros is not. Defined. I should write that euros and see if it compiles still euros somewhere. Yeah, obviously nothing happens yet. So now I need to make it so that whenever value in the euros field is changed, that this event handler will be called. And this is done by giving this onChange attribute a value, and this will be curly brackets. So now we are giving JavaScript code, and what we want to do is I will explain this in a second. I will call this update euros, and the new value will be the parameter. So let's see if it still compiles. Obviously it doesn't. So I'm missing the closing curly bracket there. And let's start seeing. So now it actually works. Whenever I type in new values, you can see also the dollars changing. So what happens? We have here specified this onChange. So basically what we are doing here, we are registering a listener to this component. Whenever the value of this text field changes, this bit of JavaScript is called. And we are using here this arrow notation, and this is quite important. But the arrow notation does is that it binds this. So it means that the value of the variable this, when code here is executed, will be the same as it is on this calling code. Means that when we are using this variable here in these couple of places, it will be the correct this variable. And the same reason we are using the arrow notation here. So instead of saying update euros is a function, new values, and then just curly brackets, if we did that, this wouldn't be the correct this. The JavaScript is really nasty in how it changes whatever the value of this is on different situations. So using this arrow notation is necessary because of that. And then the onChange, it actually gets two parameters. Well, first is the event object, where you can get some information about the event which occurred, and then it gets the new value. And in this case, I'm just giving the new value into this update euros command. And then I'm passing it to the float into the euros variable, calculating the dollars variable, and then updating the state. And because the state is updated, then this user interface declaration makes the React to update the user interface again. Now, if you think of it, every time I type in something here, React is updating the user interface. Everything works smoothly, and already maybe from this you can deduct, and I can confirm it. How React works is that it doesn't rebuild the whole interface every time. It is built to be smart so that when it gets the updated piece of code, whatever this render returns, it basically compares it to the previous version it has in the memory, and then it updates only those bits of the HTML inside what are necessary. So the actual web page changes only from whatever is necessary parts of the web page, so that it's efficient, and but still you get the declarative benefits of the declarative approach. So you don't need to worry a little bit about what part of the interface will change or whatever. You just update the state to be the correct state depending on the current situation. Of course, you might wonder, where do I know that this onChange is what I need to put and this value and so on? And these are specified in the material UI documentation. So if we go to the TextField specification here, for example, you can see there are lots of examples here, and you can see the source code easily in the documentation. We can find here all the attributes that you can provide into the text field. So you can see that the value is what specifies the value of the field. And
Sorry, can you show the code again, because I think I missed something?
Yeah, I will go back to it in a second. Yeah. And here you can see that the onChange is the callback function that is fired when the text field value changes, and the signature is function event object new value, which is string, and nothing should be returned. So from this documentation you can find the actual values.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Mine says it just says man on both fields, the euros and the dollars fields. Where is the problem?
Most likely on these lines. So none means not a number, so it means that some sort of mathematical calculation has gone wrong. Either you do some incorrect calculation, or you are using some undefined value in this part of the calculation or something like that. So you have the rate, for example, check. You use the correct variable here to pass the float.
Yeah, fine. Rate is fine.
Is rate defined somewhere up there? Because
Yeah, so I added the rate constant here on the top of the file, actually before the whole component specification starts. And of course we can do some debugging here. So you can, for example, write console.log euros DLRS dollars, and if we go to our app and open the developer console, we get the let's say, yeah, console log. So actually this line is now what it printed. The euros and the dollars. And I also get a warning here. Yeah, let's see if that specification will be.
A component is changing an uncontrolled input of type text to the.
Yeah, I'm getting that. It's you can basically ignore that for now.
And then it just says none.
None. So basically, it means that your euros and dollars are indeed none at that point.
So it's only dollars.
Yeah, of course, it's good to do like this, and so your well, now I get none because I had an empty text field, and obviously when I do this, so I empty the whole text field. The new value will be empty string, and then when I try to pass float the new empty string, it will not be a number, and that's how I get the none output. Yeah. If I continue now with yeah.
It lets you input a number, but if you remove any number, it just says none.
Yeah, so if you make the text field empty, you will get this none right now. So that's how our application works right now. So yeah, so yeah, what happens when you do that? Repeating actually what I just said. This new value will be an empty string, and we are trying to pass float an empty string, then obviously that is not a number. So that's why you get into this situation. So obviously our application is not working completely right now. We should also check for these special cases, like when it's not a number, what should we do at that point? Probably update the value of the euros to be whatever it is, but not update the dollars, because we obviously can't do the conversion and so on. But yeah, I think I will continue forward, not trying to make this perfect application right now. So here is this is for the checkbox, and right now I'm now including two of the parameters, even though I'm not using both of them, just to show the other variation of how you can do these. So I just need to basically set state to have the do round to have the value of this checked, and then I want the checkbox to have the handler for this, and this is called onCheck, the attribute I must do here, and this adjust rounding. So this is now different from how I did it for the text field. So if I now check that box, it's not rounding the values, and or is rounding and then not rounding. And yeah, so now here I use this arrow notation already here inside the attribute, and here I just gave the name of the function, so you can do either one. Reason why you might want to do this here is, as you can see, I'm just providing the new value as an parameter for this update euros call. For the adjust rounding, I'm giving or getting both of the variables which are given by default into this event handler, event and is checked, although I'm using only the is checked, so you could use the same approach in this one as well. And yeah, let me just write the clear button handler. So this is, of course, very simple. Again, I'm just calling set state, and euros is 0 and dollars is 0, and that's it. And then the raised button has, for example, onClick, or actually I should probably use onTouch tab here. Let's see if I remember correctly. And let's see if this works. No. Use the onClick for now, and I will show it in later examples. So now, yeah, now we have handler for all the three different things. So for the buttons, I just using onClick here. So whenever the button is clicked, onCheck is the value of the checkbox, or attribute of the checkbox, where you can give the value, and onChange in the text fields. Let's go to the raised button in the documentation actually to have a quick look. And so you can find in the documentation separate section here for buttons. As you can see, there are different kinds of buttons. And yeah, you can see the onClick defined here. And it's just gets the event object as a parameter, but basically I'm allowed to also ignore that in my code. And there is one typo, which initial value 0. You can also see from this that in the set state, you can set any of the variables in the state, but only need to define those that you want to be changed. Any other variable remains in the whatever value there already is. Which, of course, it's nice when your state starts growing beyond certain size, but it's also good practice to, if your state starts growing really big, at that point you probably want to split your application into child components and parent components and so on, so that each of the individual states remains reasonably small. Later we will also look at these parameters which you can give to this application or the components, or basically this is what we are doing here, giving these parameters to the components, and they won't go to the state, but there is a separate this.parameters variable where you can then access those. Yes. Then before moving on, maybe any questions at this point, or you want to look at some particular spot of the code, or talk about some aspect, of course. So based on what I explained, you possibly can understand that when I update this after every letter, the dollars value changes. Obviously, if I cannot actually now edit the dollars value because I'm setting the value explicitly from outside. So the user cannot actually edit it. So if you are using the value field, you must then also have the handler to listen to the event and update the state where the value goes. So, but it should be trivial for you based on this now to just implement similar functionality into the dollars. And in the Moodle, I think there already is a version of this where you can find the full implementation. And you can also notice that right now when I click this, immediately the rounding doesn't have any effect, because the actual rounding happens in the event handler for the euros field. So only when I'm editing the value of the euros field, then the conversion will happen. And you can, of course, try to change the application so that also when you check or uncheck the box, the rounding would immediately take effect. Of course, then you would need to decide which way the rounding should happen, which field it controls, if it works both ways, so that you can type into the dollars field and to euros update and vice versa. But yeah, then I could go on to show one more event handling possibility. I will handle generic mouse event as the last thing, just adding random functionality here. Just changing the brightness of the background. And basically you can add any of the, when you hopefully are somewhat familiar at least, that you can add these listeners also in the plain JavaScript and HTML. So onClick and so on. And there is, for example, on mouse move, so you can just register to your own handling code inside the React, also to those default ones, not only the ones defined on the components. So I will now listen to the mouse move events, and I will write a method mouse move here, which will be called, and obviously it will get the event object again. It's an attribute. And so here will be food. So I'm calculating the new color, and it will be, I will do some min check to make sure that I don't go too bright. And then let's just do this. So I will get from the event object the mouse coordinates, and just do some random calculation based on those. And well, this is how you can force the value to be int in the JavaScript. And yeah, I'm changing the background color in the state into this new color. And then in the render, so this is just a JavaScript function. It doesn't need to just contain the tags. You can do any sort of stuff here. So let me just define here a variable constant this state VG color. So I'm taking something from the state and calculate a new background color string. Yeah, it will be a little bit messy, but I'm just you can think of a clear way to do this, creating a gray color, getting the hex string out of that, and then on the paper we had this style. The style we can while we are here, I will add the text align to be left, and then background. So these are basic CSS properties which you are familiar with, but they must be defined in this, not as a CSS string, but as this JavaScript object. Let's see if things worked. Obviously not. Unexpected token there. Is it so they shouldn't be inside the return, but here inside the render. Now when I'm moving the mouse, the background of the app div is changing based on the mouse coordinates. Again, you can see that and this is maybe the best example of how the React actually renders the stuff. So obviously not the whole HTML is changing every time I'm moving the mouse. It only changes the bits of the HTML, the DOM, which are, it should change. Yeah, so if you look at this once more, so here on the very top level, on the application level, I'm listening to the mouse movement. So basically this on mouse move, this comes already from the like JavaScript level definitions that there are mouse move events on every div. And I'm calling this mouse move whenever the mouse is moved. Here is the handler. I get the event as a parameter using again the arrow notation like we always should to make sure that this is the correct this. Here I'm getting the mouse coordinates from the event, so the y coordinate and the x coordinate in the client space. So this event is mouse event, and the definition for this you can find from the official on the like HTML and JavaScript level specification, the PWC specifications on official level. And of course, you probably want to use something easier to read to find these, but we are familiar with. And yeah, very random calculation, just want the value between 0 and 255 in value, put into the state. Just to illustrate this quickly and with little code. And yeah, then the critical reminder that in the render, you can write any JavaScript code here and define any variables. And here we define this VG color variable. So here, whenever you have something inside the curly brackets, so this is the JavaScript code, then you can put those variables in there. Meaning also that you can put any of these tags actually inside variables. So you can actually say that, okay, or let or const button is, and then just put those tags. That also works. And then later on, you can put curly brackets and then put button in there. There will be some examples of this later on. Okay. Any questions about this example right now? As said, there will be a little bit clarified and commented version in the Moodle, but yeah.
The code works, but for some reason it's not changing the color even when you put the mouse. Is there some way to find out where the problem is?
Well, of course, you can again, for example, do the console.log and output the variable in there, and then you should see something like this. Whenever the mouse changes, the latest color string should be updated. And for the console, it's possible to write these messages with console.log, which logs just something you want for the debug.
It's registering the mouse movement, but not changing the color for some reason.
So do you get the correct kind of color values if you do this? Then you probably want to check this part of the code where you try to make it effective. So here we make the color effective by defining the style for the paper, and yeah, this is JavaScript, and then you should provide a JavaScript object for the style, and providing the width and also text align here, so that now you can see it's left aligned a little bit better than originally. And then I'm giving the background color, no uppercase letters in the default CSS variable name. Also in these objects, because many of the CSS variables have this dash between them, like font dash size. And for the JavaScript level, you cannot write the dash. Then you actually should use this camel case thing, so font size with big S, and get rid of the dash. I think I will mention that again a couple of times. Yeah. Yeah. We will look later how to use multiple files in more complex applications and so on, and how to define multiple components. But for now, we have been just editing this app.js, and for most of the exercises, this is all you need to do is just edit the app.js. So as long as that is the case, when you're submitting your solutions to the exercises to Moodle, it's enough to just put that app.js in there. If you are modifying multiple files, you can keep the public and the source folders. In some cases, we are putting something in the public folder as well, but that will be later on in the course. But just a reminder, don't put the node modules into the zips you upload into the Moodle. That will be huge amounts of unnecessary data. Everybody will have those on there because the Node Package Manager installs those automatically. And actually, the package.json is what tells the Node Package Manager what to install. So in extreme case, you put this whole folder except the node modules, and then whoever downloads that can then write npm install, and then npm will look into the packages and then install whatever is necessary to install. But well, during this course, we anyway will be using what have already been installed at this point. So I will have in my computer all this already. So usually just submitting, or if you want to ask some help, why isn't this working, usually just sending the app.js is enough. Okay, so maybe it's time for summary. So we have different components. Our application was made of document, of course, is the parent containing everything in the HTML document. We can put in HTML, any sort of HTML in there. We had the plain text there. We had some divs, which are not React specific. They are just HTML tags. You can put them in there. But of course, most of the time when you are working with an existing graphical user interface library, you mostly want to use those existing components and not mix your own HTML. But you can do that for the layout. And of course, if you have some other custom content, you can do that. And to define your own components, you might want to do that. And so you can freely mix the existing components and whatever HTML code you want to put in there. And then we use the material UI. We have the paper as the container where everything else went. We had the text field for entering text, 2 of them. We have the checkbox and the raised button for the clearing. And the fundamental of the graphical user interfaces is the fact that there are these events and event handlers. When user does something, an event is created, and then your code should do something based on that event. And all your code basically is in the event handlers. So for example, the button we had onClick. Yeah, you register those events on low level. Of course, React makes all these HTML and they will be registered, the DOM elements. But lots of things happen in the background for you when you are using React. On fundamental level, you don't have, obviously, any main loop. And if you have been doing web development, there is no place to put your main loop in there. You are just writing those event handlers. Even in basic JavaScript programming, everything you write is in event handlers. Web workers are kind of exception to this, and we will talk about them at one point briefly, how you can do longer term processing. And yeah, events are reacts of the user actions usually. You can also trigger them from your own code, but let's go that to later point. Yeah, there is the material UI, for example, onClick and some other handlers, and you can find those in the documentation. And you can also listen to the regular JavaScript events like we listen to the mouse events. So in this example, we use 2 kinds of events, the material UI events, of course, in the behind them, there is, of course, the regular JavaScript events, but on our programming level, those were material UI. And then we use the plain JavaScript mouse events, and you can mix those freely, as you saw. There is the event object as a parameter, and sometimes some other, like whenever text field is updated, the second parameter is the new value of the text field. And the event object can have relevant information like the most coordinates. And yeah, you specify either to the components, like the material UI components, the listeners, or directly to the DOM elements, or the part that specifies the DOM elements, whatever happens to be the actual HTML and the DOM that is the results. You don't need to worry about that. And then whenever something changes, that event listener code will be called. So the whole stack we have here, you think of it, the web browser takes care of displaying the page. It renders the DOM, the HTML specification, shows it on screen. It handles the low-level events, mouse clicks and button clicks and so on from the operating system. It receives that. And then, yeah, because it provides the JavaScript environment where the JavaScript code is run. The React framework updates the DOM by using the render calls automatically and in an optimized way, and handles the events on the component level. And of course, the React and the React Create app also have this development server, which in the background compiles the code you write, all this JSX stuff and so on, into actual HTML code, which then goes to the browser where it runs. The Material UI provides us the components and their look and feel, and those components provide those event handler parameters where you register your own event handlers. What you must do is provide the specification how the user interface should look like. So write one or more render methods. Each of the components, an application is one component, that is the top level component. Should have one render method. And then you should write those handler codes which update the state of the application. You can build new components by using the plain HTML or by combining existing components. So you can write your own, let's say, date selector component or whatever. And just then on your top level, higher level, you can have your new tag date selector, for example. You can use HTML content and CSS to adjust the layout and look of the component. Because if you're trying to do lots of CSS stuff, there might be some things that the existing components are actually overriding. So not everything might work if you try to control the looks of individual components, but like the whole layout level, you can use CSS freely. Yeah, and you can write your own components on that level. You basically work on basic HTML and CSS level, and you can specify exactly what things will look like and so on. Just run through. So user clicks a button. First, there is, of course, the browser doing things. It checks if there is some listener registered to whatever was clicked on the HTML and DOM level. React receives the event depending if there is something registered there. It will call the handler, and handler will update the application state. Once the application state has been changed, so the setState method has been called, the React will then call the render automatically. So you never call the render yourself. React will call the render. And then if the React notices that the result of the render is somehow different from whatever is displayed right now on the web page, then it will change those particular bits of the web page and nothing else. So that is very efficient from the interactivity point of view. And yeah, we are having this declarative approach. So you specify how the interface looks like in the render method. You never change the existing interface. You cannot really access the existing interface. Of course, you can try using the basic JavaScript method of like just browsing the DOM tree and trying to change something, and that will break things badly and it will be very hard and so on. So you should never try to change the interface. You just have the render method which tells how the interface should look like depending on the state and the parameters received. And then the React takes care of calling the render methods and then displays that thing. Also, you don't read the information from the components directly. So everything goes through the state. You just have the listeners. The listeners receive the new values. They update the state. The state affects the value of the components. So especially in contrast to, for example, how the Swing development in Java environment it's totally different. There you can access the components and change their values and read their values. But here, no, this is totally different type of thinking. You just update the application state into handlers. React takes care of everything else. Yeah, no need to call the render. Don't do it unless you really know what you are doing. So yeah, it can stop you from creating lots of bugs. It kind of forces you to think of or separate the interface specification from the application logic because you think of the application logic on the level of the application state, and then you just specify how the interface looks based on the state. Yeah, so in the render, we had a text field, we set the value, and if you do that, you must listen to the onChange, and that's why we were getting that one, lots of red text in the debugger console, because one of our text fields, the $ field, we did set the value, but we didn't have the onChange listener updating the value, so you couldn't actually edit the text, and that's why we were getting that warning. So when after, if you continue with this and add also onChange listener for the $, and they change the $ value of the state correctly, then we will get rid of that warning. Yeah, so if you set the value in the JSX part of the text field, then and you don't have the onChange, user cannot edit the value. The text field doesn't work. JSX is this notification where you can mix the code and markup, so you can add tags basically anywhere. You can put them into the values of the variables and so on. And then within the JSX, the tags, you can use the curly braces to put some JavaScript code in there, so you can go back and forth between those. Of course, what happens behind the scene to create React app toolchain is behind the scenes compiling all this into JavaScript. So the browser doesn't support the JSX natively, but the compiler compiles it to the something that is pure JavaScript, which the browser can do. And because of this compiling, you can also get errors from the compiler when you have some code which doesn't compile. And the components which you specify, they are not compiled to actually HTML inside there. They are compiled into these JavaScript objects, and then those are what the React can effectively compare that if something has changed. And then only then if something has changed in those internal representations, then it goes to the actual HTML and updates the bits that are relevant. Using the JSX is not actually necessary, but usually you want to do it. Obviously, there's there for a reason, because it's very easy then to write the code to specify the interface. Yeah, and okay, I'm keep mistyping it. It's create React app, not React create app. Yeah, it's this whole tool chain, which includes lots of these different tools like Webpack, which packs everything and compiles all those different files into together and so on. And Babel, which makes sure that you can write with the latest JavaScript specifications, and then it can actually compile it to something that runs also in the older browsers and so on. Lots of stuff, and I'm not even familiar exactly what all sort of things are there. So it's really nice that they have built this one. Ready-made things that you don't have to set up your own development environment yourself. It provides you lots of these error messages and so on, and automatically watches the code. So whenever you save your files, it should automatically update the web page on your browser, and no need to do any separate compilation or anything. It all happens automatically. And then once your application is ready, it has this tool to actually compile it into something you can just upload into the web server, and that's it. So it's development time tool, and then the final application doesn't need to create React app or any of that stuff anymore. So it's using this Node.js based tool for the development, but after the application is finished, any web server can serve the application. And the React developer tools can be helpful. I think it's at least for Chrome and Firefox both available for both. And Material UI provides you the implementation of these user interface components. And that's it. Any quick questions? If not, thank you for your time and